All right, you landed the podcast interview, but you are either freaking out or completely paralyzed at the thought of delivering an interview that converts listeners into taking some sort of action. If this sounds like you, stay put. This episode is for you, my friend. Hi there, pitches. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Go Pitch Yourself. My name is Angie Trueblood, and I am your fearless leader and the founder of the Podwize group. And I am so honored that you are spending this part of your day with me. So today's episode is another episode in our Summer Lovin series of our past top downloaded episodes. This one is from the very beginning of Go Pitch Yourself, October of 2019. So forgive me if I sound like a novice podcaster during it. It's actually a conversation with one of my most favorite people, Nikki Rausch, otherwise known as the sales maven. In the episode, Nikki and I chat about how to take podcast interviews and turn them into lead generating opportunities while still delivering incredible value. We're not going to be a spammy spammerton during our interviews. We also chat about the importance of planting seeds as a way to create curiosity and how you can give listeners a quick win during your interviews. Now, this episode has proven to be super popular because it gets to the heart of why we guest on shows, typically to actually generate leads. It's packed with actionable how-tos, and I like it because it's kind of meta, right? Nikki does each of these core tenets that she's teaching and talking about during the interview. So this time around, listen to the strategies that she's sharing and see if you can identify when and how she's using them during the interview. It's like a fun summer puzzle, right? I hope you love it this time around as much as you did the first time. I have my friend, Nikki Rausch, on the show with us today, and I could not be more excited to bring her to you guys to share her expertise, but also her experience with podcast interviews so that she can offer all of the inside pieces to help you guys really capitalize on opportunities, but also get an inside view of why podcast interviews will be such a good use of your time. So Nikki, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes. And so for those of you that do not know Nikki, one, I don't know why you don't know Nikki, but Nikki Rausch is actually the founder and CEO of Sales Maven, where she helps entrepreneurs sell in a way that builds relationships, creates true connection, and results in more closed deals and long-term clients. Which just that one statement should exemplify why Nikki and I love each other so much. She is like my soul sister when it comes to sales and how to increase sales. And the interesting part of Nikki is that she does this through a variety of ways. So she is a sales coach. She works one-on-one with some folks and even has a membership to be able to coach people in groups, which is awesome. She's a sales trainer. She is also a speaker. So when Nikki and I first met, she had a lot of experience speaking on live stages. And she's also an author. She published her third book this year in July called The Selling Staircase, which we will definitely link to that in the show notes. Nikki, what did I miss? You're so amazing. I'm sure I missed something.
I feel like you covered the majority of how I work with clients. Yeah, for sure. And then really how people get introduced to me a lot of times is through podcast interviews. So I work with clients privately. I have a membership community called the Sales Maven Society. I teach live events from time to time. I speak, I write. That's me in a nutshell.
We met actually earlier this year at the Lakeside Women's Business Conference in Wisconsin, and we were both actually speakers. It's Robin Walker's conference. It's amazing. Some incredible women show up for that conference. And we both were speakers, and we met each other, and we instantly clicked. But Nikki ended up following up with me after, and it's interesting because she has tons of experience speaking on live stages. And she actually brought to the table a lot of experience doing podcast interviews. but they were all incoming requests. So they were all people who had either met her at speaking events or had heard her on other podcasts that were reaching out and inviting Nikki to come on their show. So, Nikki, if you'd like, I'd love for you to expand a little bit on why you ever came to me looking to get on podcasts, since you already had been on a great number of them.
One of the things I pay attention to in my business is, how do people find me, right? I think we should all pay attention to that.
Yes.
How are your clients finding you? So the highest percent of new clients come to me through speaking. And what I was finding was that the second highest way of new clients coming into my business were coming through podcast interviews. And like you said, they had all been organic. People had been reaching out to me, asking me to be a guest on their podcast. I had never once asked to be a guest on anybody's podcast. So I was just always super flattered, right? That somebody wanted me to come on their podcast and talk about sales. So when I started paying attention to these leads coming in the door, I was like, well, how do you amplify you want to amplify things in your business, right? Like, how can I get on podcasts of people who've never heard me speak, who I haven't met at a conference, and, who maybe somebody hasn't spoke my name to them yet? How would they ever find me? Well, they find me through Angie, because now she goes out and pitches me to be on podcast. And I think I hired you initially to do a 3-month contract. And, you're so good at what you do that in the first month, we had quite a few yeses.
Yeah.
And these were audiences that I just had never been exposed to, and they had never been exposed to me. And so podcasts have been just such a tremendous way for me to reach a broader audience, and for people who maybe didn't even know that this type of coaching was available to them, like for them to find their way to me. And I love podcasts because the content is evergreen. I mean, I have podcasts that I was on 2 years ago that people still join my list because they go back and listen to that content, and then they're like, "Ooh, I like what you said in that podcast, and now I want to be in your community."
Yeah, I love that you shared how you saw what was working and decided to double down on it. I think so often when we talk about marketing and visibility, there's a million different ways that we can expose our business to other people, but really finding out what works and focusing on that is what often makes or breaks your marketing efforts. And I think about it. So Nikki also is a service provider. I would say you would agree that you kind of fall into it's a coach, but you offer one-to-one, not service the way that I pitch my clients, but you definitely offer one-to-one support. And so I would venture to say that aside from some of your speaking and podcast interviews, that referrals are probably a great way that people find you too. Would you agree? Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's the same in my business as well. The thing about referrals, though, they're a bit out of your control. There are definitely things that you can do to increase the number of referrals coming into your business. But at the end of the day, I like to be a bit more in control of my marketing, not hoping that someone that loves me stumbles upon someone that needs me and sends them back to me. For me, that's icing on the cake. And I found that me taking control of pitching myself for podcast interviews, it sort of increased that referral base almost, because really by having a podcast host inviting you onto their show, they're almost giving you a referral or recommendation. They're telling their audience, hey, I trust this person enough to let you meet them. And then if your audience ends up having a need, often they will go back to you as the expert. So I love that you double down on what you saw was working. And I just wanted to share with people, one reason that I love podcast interviews is because you're in control of some parts of it. You're in control of how many people you pitch, right? You may not be in control of how many people say yes, but the beauty is you definitely can make that a concrete to-do in your goals and your planning. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to dig in a little bit to some of the expertise that you have, because you're kind of an interesting bird, in the sense that, yeah, have you heard that before, Nikki? In the sense that you came to me with a lot of live speaking experience. A lot of folks come to me looking to step into live speaking, and they recognize that podcast interviews are a great first step at making that happen. So you brought to me a lot of experience. And I think what was really useful is that you intuitively know how to take a speaking opportunity or a podcast interview opportunity and turn that into a lead generating opportunity without it seeming slimy or inauthentic, because you focus so much on connection and relationships. So I would love for you to share with our listeners how, when they get a podcast interview opportunity, what are some ways that they can navigate through that interview and help turn it into a lead generating opportunity by the time that interview closes up?
There are a couple key things that I'm going to recommend in this particular instance, because this is the stuff that I teach,
Yes.
right? Just like in the sales process, my 5-step approach to sales, which is the selling staircase, there are things that you do that lead people down that path, or lead them up the stairs to where you exchange dollars for services. So in a podcast interview, step one in my signature process is the introduction. And in a podcast interview, you are being introduced to people. So there are things you want to do to make sure you're making a powerful first impression. That means, one of the ways to make a powerful first impression is to be sure that you are focused, that you're calm, you're cool, you're collected, and that you sound like an authority when you talk about who you are and what you do. So that means don't downplay your expertise. Don't say anything that isn't true. You don't want to toot a horn that shouldn't be yours to toot. But at the same time, do not downplay who you are or what you bring to the table, because this is your opportunity to make a powerful first impression. And then step 2 in my signature process is creating curiosity. And part of creating curiosity is planting seeds. So throughout the interview, instead of just answering every question with the straight, they ask a question, I give an answer. They ask a question, I give an answer. There needs to be a little bit more that's added in there. So I call this planting seeds. For instance, if you were to ask me a little bit about something like a sales question, I'm going to probably plant a seed in my answer. So if you said something about, tell me more about creating curiosity, Nikki, I might say, curiosity is probably the number one thing that I coach on. And it's something that I even have a full training on inside my Sales Maven Society. And here's one tip about creating curiosity. Do you hear the seed I planted? You can work with Nikki privately. You could join her Sales Maven Society. So you don't just answer a question, you plant a seed. And it doesn't need to sound salesy or gross. It's just a true statement. And it's part of that planting seed, so that when somebody hears it, that person who's ready might go, ooh, I should check into the Sales Maven Society, or, oh, I would love to have a one-on-one session with Nikki. How does she do that? How does she work with clients one-on-one, right? It's for those people. Now, some people are just going to ignore it. That's okay. They're not ready for you. Those are the people that you're speaking right. We want to speak right to the hearts and the minds of the people who are ready to take a next step with you.
Well, and you make a very interesting point, because when I asked you that question, one of the first things that you said was, you said my signature framework or my signature selling process, I call it the selling staircase. So you were planting seeds and also establishing authority in that, because if you can put some sort of structure around how you answer questions and have that framework, or just reinforce in the listener's mind that I've done this before, I got this, I got a plan for it, and this is how I work with my people. So I won't say you unknowingly did it, because I know you know what you're doing, but I picked up on it, and then it was ironic that that's what you go into explaining. So the key is doing it exactly how Nikki did it, to where you don't pick up that you're having seeds planted in an interview, things that you just subconsciously as the listener start absorbing, and you develop almost a fuller picture of who this expert is and how they might be able to help you if you have a need. I love that.
Yeah. And that wasn't unconscious. That was very strategic. Like I
Yeah.
don't answer questions that don't plant some type of a seed around something. Now, that doesn't mean I do it on every single question. And
Right.
yet in a podcast interview, the podcaster may or may not have a lot of experience with you. And often now the podcasts that I go on, because you're pitching me for these podcasts, I don't know them often. I might have listened to a few of their episodes and hopefully they have at least read what you've sent them about me, but
Yeah.
they're just learning about me for the first time too. So they don't know necessarily to be like, by the way, Nikki has this signature framework, blah, blah, blah. So it's my job to plant those seeds, not the podcasters.
Absolutely. And along those same lines, you talk about the 5 steps of your selling framework, the selling staircase. So the beauty of me working with Nikki is that I get to pick up on all of her expertise because I develop her talk topics and they're all around what she's an expert at. And so I feel like I am better at sales having had you as a client. So thank you, Nikki. Uh, but the third step, the discovery piece, there's really an interesting way to bring that into a podcast interview. I would love for you to share with the listeners how you do that, because a lot of times people will think of discovery as, oh, that's that phone call you get on with folks who might be interested in working with you. But really, it's a whole phase and a way that you can sort of introduce the idea of them having a need. And you do it beautifully on the podcast that you've been interviewed on. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yes. So, well, first of all, the process of the discovery or the purpose, the purpose of the discovery, whether you're on a one-on-one call with somebody or whether you're on a podcast, is to help people understand what's their need, what's their problem, what's their want. And then the next kind of piece of a discovery is to ask questions that lead people to hiring you. And so in a podcast interview, because I'm not the one asking them questions, I might still pose some common questions, or I might tell a story that talks about some of the common problems and needs that clients experience, because it helps self-identify for the listener, like, ooh, that's me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So when you are talking about your topic, your area of expertise, this is also one of the reasons why you want to be specific when you're talking about something. So don't just speak in general terms. Like I could come on here and go, sales is really important. And if you don't know what you're doing with sales, like you're probably not going to grow your business. No, I talk about, hey, if you don't know how to create curiosity and you don't know how to move somebody to the next step, oftentimes you miss a step in the selling process and you don't even know why the client didn't buy from you. But really, it's because you're missing important steps in the selling process. And I always say, you cannot skip steps. Now, your client can walk right up to you off the street and be like, here's thousands of dollars. I want to hire you. Fine, they can skip steps,
Yeah.
but you don't get to skip steps. You have to walk somebody through this process. So just like this discovery piece is helping people understand, do I have a problem? Do I have a need that this person can solve? And then giving information that leads them to hiring you. And the reason I talk about curiosity, frankly, a lot on podcasts is because most of the people who hire me know that they don't really know how to create curiosity when they're talking about their business. And that's one of the first things that we work on, because if you don't know how to create curiosity when you're talking about your business, you don't get to go to the next step with
Yep.
people. If you don't get to go to the next step, you're never making it to step 5, which is where you exchange dollars for service or product.
So can you give us an example then of what, and this is something else that you work with your clients on. And again, I know the insides of this just because of my experience with Nikki, but you are excellent at storytelling. And on the podcast that you've been interviewed on, you're great at being able to add some meat to your content by sharing stories. So do you have anything that you could share really about that curiosity piece, about how you've helped someone, or any tips that folks could kind of take away, especially on a podcast, to create curiosity?
Yes. So, one of the things that you want to do is when you tell a story, tell it about a client. Don't talk about all your clients. Don't speak in general terms. Say, I just worked with somebody who recently, this was the problem that they were having.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, if I'm Angie, I'm
Mm-hmm.
just going to pretend I'm you right now.
Totally.
And I'm on a podcast being interviewed and somebody's talking about like, well, how do people know when they should go on a podcast or when they should hire somebody to pitch them? You could say, well, I have a client who actually is a well-known speaker. She speaks all over. And she was finding that one of the second greatest source of leads coming into her business was podcast interviews. So she doubled down on this because she understands how important it is to really find those things that are working in your business and amplify it. And we've been able to open her to audiences that she would have never been able to find on her own. That's the power of podcasting. And that's the power of the work that I do, is being able to help her get exposed to audiences who need her, but would have never found her otherwise. That's me telling a very specific story about a client.
Yes, you're very good at what you do, Nikki Rausch. Thank you for that. Yeah. So, Nikki, I would love for you to share a little bit about how much value do you offer up on a podcast interview? I feel like in the online space, people are so concerned about how much free content do I give away? What do I give away in my opt-in compared to my blog posts, to where there's still a reason for people to pay me for my expertise. And honestly, podcast interviews, you are giving away free content. So do we draw the line? I mean, do we hold back our expertise? How do we package it up to leave people wanting more?
I love this question so much. And I get this a lot in the sales conversations too, especially for people who are doing webinars, and the exact same question from like a very sales focused conversation too. I don't actually want you holding back, because when you hold back, it like causes people to get suspicious. It's like, what is she not telling me? And why is she being so cagey about it? Now, on the flip side, the way that you do this and do it well is you give just one thing that is like a bite-sized, actionable piece of information that somebody can implement. And one of my clients named it, she calls it Nikki's Jot, because I say this a lot to my clients, just one thing. Focus on one thing, just one thing. Now, I can talk about all 5 steps of the selling staircase, and I can give one thing in each step that if somebody goes out and implements, they're going to get results. Now, is there more than one thing in each step? Heck yes. Mm-hmm. Heck yes, there is. There's so much that can go on, that can be the nuances, the stuff that, people who've been coaching with me for a while are starting to be like, oh my gosh, this clicks now. I've heard you say it 18 times, Nikki, but it's like today I got it so much that I was able to close this new deal that, a year ago I would never been able to close, right? So it's the idea of giving somebody a bite-sized piece. And instead of trying to give people all the things, give them one thing and make it juicy. Make it so like, oh my gosh, I want more. And if she gives me this that's so juicy and so awesome, what else does she have? Then that creates that curiosity to go to the next step. But if you're like, I have a 5-step signature process, and I'm not going to tell you what the 5 steps are. I'm just going to tell you one of the steps. Right. Like I'll tell you what all 5 are. I may go deeper into one than I will into some of the others. But the thing that I go deep on is going to be juicy, and it's going to be good. And if you implement, you're going to see results from it.
I love that. If you think about it also from the authority building and how you talked about that introduction piece, it is so important to exhibit some level of restraint because, and I know that you actually talk about this when you dig deeper into like the proposal phase, you know what that audience needs because you are an expert at sales. So if you vomit a lot of high level tips on them, it will have no impact other than leading them to be very confused and to try these little quick wins. But if you if you share the overall process and go deep into one specific area, that is exactly where they will get that quick win. And so I think it's beautiful. Not only does it provide value to the audience, but it really reinforces your expertise because you know what they can handle and you know what you can share with them that will allow them to have that win. So for me, that's a double whammy in terms of how you approach your interviews.
Yeah, it's so important that you really pay attention. Like what you just said here is that you give them something that they can go and implement and get a win on. Then they want more, right?
Yeah.
Like that's actually one of the things I'm known for when I go and speak is people often will say, and I mean, this happens almost always when I go and speak, people will say, you're the best speaker that we've had in years. Like one time a woman came up and she's like, I've come to this event for 20 years. You are by far the best speaker we've ever had in 20 years, which was a huge compliment.
For sure.
But really what it was is she's like, I've never had anybody give me something in a talk like this that I felt like I could go and immediately do. But you have to give them enough information to go and do something with it. If all they have is like you said, very surface level stuff, and you word vomit like all these things onto them, and then it confuses the issue or makes them go like, oh, well, I don't know what to do with that. Or
Right.
if you give them like an 18-step process and they're like, I lost you on step like 3 because it's too much. It's too detailed. It requires too much like, okay, so now I have to go be on LinkedIn for a year and then I have to join some group, and it's like all these millions of steps. And then they go, well, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
Like I'm driving my car right now. I can't take all this in. So give them something that is, like I said, bite size, they can implement, they can see a result, and then they will want more.
I love it. So then let's just shift for one last piece of it. You have been interviewed on a number of podcasts. Obviously, you are an expert at giving amazing interviews because people always give us feedback. And I remember one specifically where the interviewer just said, thank you. You've just given us so much value. And again, you're not holding back, but you're giving the audience what they need to have a win. Tell me then, how has being featured on these podcast interviews, how has that resulted in business? So how are you transitioning from people hearing you, people loving you? I guess give the listeners some insight into how it's impacted your business. Do you feel like you've gotten clients from it? Just so that they can really understand the value of not only being featured as a guest, but really intentionally following some of these rules and approaches that you've shared with us.
I mean, the impact has been huge in my business. I think the first 3 months that we worked together, I went and did a podcast interview. And when we got off, when like the interviewer stopped the interview, she's like, I've got to hire you. And she hired me on the spot, and became this awesome client who I just adore and love working with.
Yeah.
So that's not uncommon, right? One of the things I always do when I go and speak, or if I'm interviewed on a podcast, I always offer a free gift. And this is a way for people to get like another little nugget from me. And it's usually always my ebook, which is all around closing the sale, that talks a little bit about the discovery, the proposal, and the close, those 3 steps in my signature process, and gives people some language suggestions. Because that's one of the things my clients find the biggest value in is that I actually break down the language for people. And I hate the word script, although my clients call them scripts because it gives them a starting place. And I'm finding now with some work that I'm doing with my coach, I'm always like, if he would just give me his language, then I could tweak it and make it my own.
Yeah.
And so I give my clients scripts. I'm using air quotes when I say this,
Right.
to get them started. And so I do that in my ebook too. I give people some very specific language that they come back and they're like, if I had this language 10 years ago, like I can't imagine what I would do. Or if I had it 6 months ago, like, wow. So I always give a gift and then they go into a nurture sequence, right? Because now they're on my list. So I'm going to nurture them. And oftentimes they pop out and become paying clients from there. Or sometimes the other thing that happens, the other kind of interesting impact from being on podcasts is I show up at live events and I will start, into a conversation with somebody, or just be standing around a group of people and we'll be talking. And I cannot tell you how many times people have said, I know you. And I'm like, oh, you do? Like, how would we know each other? And we try to figure it out. And then I would say 9 out of 10 times it's because people have said, oh, I heard you on a podcast. I recognized your voice and I remember your podcast. I liked you so much. I actually went and binge listened to like 5 other podcasts you were on.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot. So that's making an impact because when I show up places, I already have some built-in introduction, know, like, and trust with people because they've heard me on a podcast, which legitimizes me and my business. I'm not just some like random chick who showed up at an event like, oh, here's an expert.
Yeah. And we see that a lot, especially with folks that have a one-to-one offering, is it definitely shortens the window of meeting someone and closing the sale if you kind of follow the steps because they do know you a lot more and they trust you because a lot of times they will binge listen to wherever you have been featured. So I love that. And it's still great for people that have more automated programs because it is that list building generator as well. So it's kind of also another double whammy if you think about it. And then there's also that general buzz. And I feel like that's kind of what you're talking about when you go to an event and someone already knows you, and we've seen as we've worked together, you're still getting incoming requests for people to interview you on their show. So a lot of clients that I work with, if they're just starting to get featured on podcast interviews, it's almost like you're telling the world, hey, I'm totally open to being interviewed on podcasts. And that's where you were too when you came to me because you had said yes to so many that had asked you. I feel like people started to recognize that, oh, Nikki's open to being interviewed and she gives a great interview. I'd like to share her with my people. So I think there's a million different ways that the podcast interview can definitely generate business and buzz. So thank you for sharing it. I will give a tactical tip for folks that are listening if they're sort of DIYing their own visibility. One thing that Nikki and I have had some success with, and I encourage and almost force my clients to use it, is a WordPress plugin called Pretty Links that allows you to share the same opt-in or freebie with any interview that you are featured on, but you're able to track how many clicks came from particular shows. So the beauty of that is we can go back, and when Nikki and I checked in last month, she was able to pull up and share her WordPress screen with me, and we could see the shows that she had been on, the freebie that she had given them with their special link, and see what podcasts had the most folks come back and click on that link. And that's always a great idea, again, to kind of double down on what's working. We were able to identify the audiences that definitely seem to resonate with Nikki and find similar matching mirrored audiences to pitch her for moving forward. So it's always nice to have metrics in hand. Just like Nikki said, you were measuring before where your leads were coming from. I like to be able to measure, well, where's the interest coming from? Who are the types of people that are loving her? So those are just some tactical tips for folks that are out there getting themselves guest interview spots. Okay, Nikki, you have given us so much information. I'm going to link to your resources and highlight a couple of the comments because I think like the planting seeds is so important for people to keep front of mind. We'll list all of that in the show notes. But you did plant a seed about a freebie that you offer. And so I am hoping that you're going to let our audience have access to it. So can you tell us where they can get your ebook?
Yes, absolutely. So you can download the Closing the Sale ebook by going to your sales maven, and it's maven.com//GPY. Go pitch yourself. So yoursalesmaven.com/GPY, and you can download the book yourself.
Awesome. And then if people just want to get sticky with you and follow you in all the places, where are you the most active where they can connect with you?
I am by far the most active on Facebook, and that is because I'm on there all the time for my community. We have a private group as part of the Sales Maven Society, so I'm on there regularly offering people language suggestions and engaging with them and offering feedback for things that they're working on. So Facebook by far. I'm also on LinkedIn and I'm also on Instagram, but those really are my kind of three main social media platforms. So if that resonates with one of your audience, I'd love to connect with them there.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Go Pitch Yourself. If you found this episode to be helpful, friend, you would be blown away by what we can accomplish together. Here are 2 next best steps. 1, be sure to sign up for our bi-weekly newsletter. That is twice a month, if that term confuses you as much as it does me. Each week that our episodes drop, I send an action-focused email, including an insider tip of the week based on the work that we do behind the scenes in our clients' business. For example, a recent tip of the week included how to estimate how large a podcast audience is. To get access to this exclusive content, pop on over to the podwisegroup.com/pitches and sign up. As a special thank you, you'll get your first insider tip of the week as access to 6 pitches my team and I have sent that were accepted, including the core components of any great pitch. Number 2, schedule a call with me to figure out which of our services, if any, would be a good fit for you. We have a variety of ways to support you and your team in helping grow your business through podcast guesting, and I am pretty skilled at helping identify pain points and solutions. Hop over to the podwisegroup.com/services and grab a spot on my calendar at the bottom of the page.